The local government election date now proclaimed, attention is turning to voter participation, campaign strategies and the role of political parties ahead of the polls. Questions remain about what drives voter turnout, the impact of political campaigns, and whether voters prioritize manifestos or personalities. For more on voter behaviour, campaign effectiveness and election trends, let's speak now to political campaigns specialist at the Political Campaigns Resource Hub. That's Gcotyelwa Jimlongo, who joins us via our video link. Lovely to have you on the program. Thanks very much indeed for making the time to speak to us. And perhaps as we reflect on this milestone moment, we can begin by speaking about what you reckon is missing from the vantage point of voters. I mean, for example, what do the numbers tell us about this group of people and why they're so important in this election?
Yeah. Morning, Ayanda. Thank you so much for having me. So basically, I think what we first need to start off, rightfully so, as you mentioned, are the numbers around the missing voter. Because really this missing voter is essentially the most important, actually, part of the voter base that the political parties really need to know and understand. We know that really there are sort of two main categories of this group of people. The eligible but unregistered voter, which is sitting at around 11 million currently in South Africa, as well as the registered non-voter, which has really been inching towards 17 million across the years. And so essentially, that's a really big group of people, particularly that 17 million number, where political parties really need to hone in on who are the registered voters as per the voters' roll and how can they get them to the polls to vote for them specifically.
Yeah. Is it too soon, Gcotyelwa, to speak about whether or not we can anticipate a whole lot more people showing up to vote this time around? Because when you consider those who've registered and those who are eligible to vote, both numbers have increased, but the proof, if you like, is in how many people physically show up to cast their ballots.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very important question, and I think it leads into the work that political parties really need to do. Currently, when it came to the first voter registration weekend that was rolled out by the IEC, as well as this last one from the 1st to 2nd of August, we did see a lot of political parties on the ground and really trying to mobilize voters. And really, the voter registration drive is the first sort of phase of political parties and of their political campaigns to get the voters out there. Because essentially, you can't turn out voters who haven't even registered to vote in the first place. But I think what we'll begin to see, which is a part of our project that we've rolled out recently as the Political Campaigns Resource Hub, is a political campaign watch project where we've deployed 10 watchers across the country in Gauteng, in KZN, in the Eastern Cape, as well as the Western Cape, to really watch the growth and what's happening amongst eligible voters or unregistered voters as well in the lead up to the election. And what we've really been seeing is there's a lot of activity, particularly in KZN and Gauteng, with the Eastern Cape as well emerging as quite an interesting province to watch. And there's a lot of vibrancy and a lot of activity happening in those provinces, particularly amongst young people.
Yeah. Speaking about those, did you call them watch parties?
Campaign watchers.
Campaign watchers. You can see where my mind is this Friday. The campaign watchers. Talk to us about what these watchers are essentially picking up. I mean, some campaigns, it feels like, have already gotten off. I'm thinking of a particular candidate in Johannesburg who we know has had quite the presence on social media, rowing in potholes, as it were. Whereas for other political parties, there isn't much activity.
Yeah, and that's absolutely what we've been discovering on the ground, right? So our campaign watchers are watching across 8 dimensions that we've put out, because first and foremost, our belief is that campaigns really start at the data, and we need to start approaching them as scientific research in order for political parties to also take voters seriously and to take the campaign process seriously. And so some of the things that our watchers have been watching on is regards to ground tactics. So what's happening in the rallies, canvassing, door-to-door campaigns, social media, what are we seeing on Facebook, on TikTok, on X, They've also been watching resourcing. What can we objectively see on the ground in terms of campaign resources across the various political parties? They've been watching posters. What do the posters tell us? And can those traditional modes really turn voters out to vote? But I think more interestingly, as part of the dimension that we're watching, is AI and innovation as well. Within the age of AI, are we seeing a lot of political parties really using a lot of innovative tactics in terms of their political campaigns? And really, there's been quite a lot of interesting data to come out of that, where we've seen in general, as the campaign period has started since the end of May, really a lot of political parties aren't necessarily looking to be the most organized, especially around their communications in terms of their campaign activities. So a lot of what our watchers have seen is that even to monitor these kinds of campaigns is a difficult thing to do because there are no central communication lines to understand where a certain event is happening, where a rally is happening, who's going on a door-to-door campaign in a particular day. So there is really that sort of disorganization that we're seeing come through quite a lot. And we're hoping that now that the proclamation of the election has taken place, we'll really start to see a more organized format that the political parties can take.
You know, in the event of a local government election, I find that the messaging kind of converges around a central message. Most parties are going to promise better service delivery, comes down to water, electricity, refuse collection. They're going to tell you they'll fix the potholes. And because of that, I wonder if the data is suggesting anything to you about what ultimately drives voters in particular directions. I mean, does it come down to the personalities of these parties? Or do you think it's largely hinges still on these manifestos that they put out?
100%. So I think the thing that political parties really need to understand about voters is that voters are smart, right? They understand the tactics that political parties deploy. They understand that when political parties mobilize, particularly around, the provision of political party regalia, the T-shirts, the food parcels, a lot of those, as much as they are, speaking to bread and butter issues, I think voters really understand the fact that, ultimately political parties are trying to get their vote through those tactics. And so, for example, in another one of our data that we were able to harvest in Gauteng, particularly in Cosmo City, where one political party was really doing a lot of work around RDP housing and ensuring that people within that community had access to housing. And so all of those kinds of issues that are still bread and butter, that are, of course, things that voters care about, we are seeing that political parties are trying to hone into those. But I think a big missing gap is to understand that a lot of the voters aren't necessarily going to go and read a manifesto, right? A voter needs to understand that at the very core of your campaign, you understand what they care about, what means the most to them, and you also speak to their everyday lives. Are they able to get to work without bumping into an incredibly large pothole? Are they able to gain access to water? And so those issues are really what we're seeing. Young people especially are galvanizing around. In KZN, we saw a service delivery march where one of the political parties were able to hone in on that and take advantage of that service delivery protest as well. So there have been a really interesting number of ways that throughout the everyday issues, service delivery, housing, etc., political parties have really galvanized around those issues to ensure that they take the missing voter along with them.
Yeah. It'd be remiss of us not to speak about the considerable amount of people who still don't necessarily believe that politics is the vehicle through which their lives will change. And I think that's something that's really occupied the minds of IEC officials for the past couple of years now, especially if you watch the trends around how many people ultimately show up. There have been several different, shall we call them, avenues that the IEC has now employed. I know there was a IEC WhatsApp line. There's a big push of getting people to register online. In other words, the IEC coming to them as opposed to them having to walk to the IEC. Do you reckon those will make the difference?
I think so. I do think that some of those modes are quite effective. Particularly, I think the WhatsApp line, when you test it, it's quite user-friendly. It's something that I also think young people might be able to relate to. But I think it's still to be understood whether or not those modes will actually reach remote people or will actually reach the missing voter in and of itself. I think the proof really of that will only be in the pudding. And we'll only really be able to see that once we encounter voter turnout. turnout. But I think thus far, it would be remiss to, take for granted the efforts of the IEC. But I do think that from the political parties' vantage point, they also really need to be doing the work along, and they have been. When it came to the registration weekends, we saw a lot of political parties setting up their booths, handing out coffee and going to walks and park runs, for example, and really meeting people where they were. And so even beyond the online element of it all, really, I think the proof for us will be in how political parties are able to go to the voter on the ground and bring them along with them.
Now that the date has been proclaimed, the Election Code of Conduct also gets into full swing. In other words, there's expected behaviours from those who are competing for votes, essentially. And I prelude my question with this because we already know that there's been what seems to be a politically motivated killing in KwaZulu-Natal already. And the concern, of course, is that election violence or political violence will rear its ugly head once again, and we have such a dark history insofar as that is concerned in the country. What's your level of confidence about whether or not politicians in particular will strike the right tone in keeping that at bay?
I think striking the right tone is an incredibly important part as well. Like I said before, voters are smart people. Voters understand what political parties are trying to do, and I think are very aware of what might motivate political killings as well and political violence. And so I think for us, really, the most important thing would be to understand how political parties can approach those and understand that. And I think us as South Africa as a whole need to understand that violence in and of itself can be a campaign tactic, or is one mode where political parties can galvanize around creating fear, creating this illusion of, if you don't vote for us, then this is what's going to happen in the community. And that's what we've been seeing emerge as the trend of political violence. And so it's really important to understand that it is a fear tactic, and it is a tactic that the political parties can employ, but to understand how to speak against that, right, and to condemn these acts. But really to understand the effects that they will have on the voter as well. And even when we look at voter turnout and we look at the results of the local government elections, we're able to see whether or not those elements of violence emerge as part of the results. Did they galvanize voters, or did they alienate voters? And I think that's something that will be really interesting for us to watch.
Absolutely. This was an interesting conversation. Gcotyelwa Jimlongo, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Hopefully the first of many chats you and I will have as we build up to the 4th of November. Once again, Gcotyelwa Jimlongo is a political campaign specialist with Political Campaigns Resource Hub. Really do appreciate the time.